The national championship will be played tonight between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. The Texas Longhorns have been in the semifinals 2 years in a row. What do they need to do to make sure they're in this national championship game next year? We discuss on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. So visit FanDuel.com today to get started. The theme of today's episode is, what does Texas need to do to get in the national championship game, as most of us prepare to watch Ohio State and Notre Dame play tonight for the right to be crowned national champions in the first year of the 12-team playoff. So that's what we're discussing today. And then in the last segment, I'm going to give my thoughts on who I think is going to win and how I think the game is going to go. But today's episode is, what does Texas need to do to get in the national championship game? All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's been about 9-10 days since Texas lost to Ohio State, and it just still hurts. Like it just still just doesn't feel right that Texas is done playing, that they're out of it. Just getting up to make this content. I don't have the same juice. I don't have the same enthusiasm. It damn near felt like the college football season was over, right? It feels like more than 10 days since Texas played. Like, it's just, man, like this might be the hardest I've taken a Texas loss in a while. Like, I don't know. It just, yeah, my whole world's been turned upside down since Texas lost. But anyway, let me be serious. Like I said, as we prepare to watch, Ohio State and Notre Dame tonight in the national championship, what does Texas need to do to make sure they're in this position, right? Because they've been close but no cigar. And of course you can celebrate getting to the semifinals. Of course you can celebrate Texas having good seasons. But we know that when this program is at this level, when they're winning at this level, it's championship or bust. You can't be excited to get to the semifinals. And even though you won 2 playoff games this year, that's a hell of an accomplishment, right? Making the 14 playoff last year was a hell of an accomplishment. Texas needs to find a way to get over the hump and get to the national championship game and give themselves a chance to win it. So over the first couple of segments, this is going to be more conversational today, kind of just chopping it up with y'all. I don't have any notes written down. It's not structured. I just woke up this morning and I said, what does Texas need to do to make sure they're playing tonight, right? Not tonight, but on this day next year, whatever date it is, on that final Monday of the college football season, what does Texas need to do to make sure that they're playing in that game? So let's just kind of chop it up, right? I think the first thing is that it all comes down a little bit to the luck of the draw and who you draw in the playoffs. Because I think if you look at Notre Dame's path to the national championship, and this is no disrespect to Notre Dame, great team, right? I think Texas could have made it to the championship with a similar path. So if we're asking what does Texas need to do to get there, a lot of that does come down to the luck of the draw and the schedule. I believe if you lined up SMU, Boise State, and Penn State on Texas's schedule, that was their path to get to the national championship, then I firmly believe Texas would be in the Natty, right? Even though they struggled with Arizona State and, it was a 4th and 13 away from losing, I do think that Texas would have beaten SMU, Boise State, and Penn State to get to the national championship. However, on their side of the bracket, you had Clemson, Arizona State, and then you faced Ohio State, who has looked head and shoulders better than anybody else in the playoffs. So it's a situation like we saw in the NFL over the weekend with Bills and Ravens, where it's like both of these teams are good enough to win a Super Bowl, but one of them is going to have to knock each other out in the divisional round. And I thought it was the same thing. It was like Texas's path to the national championship. They had to face Ohio State on the way there. And Ohio State just happened to look, once again, head and shoulders better than everybody else. So I think the first thing is the path has to kind of line up. Now, of course, you want Texas to be in that Ohio State position where it's like, we're better than whoever you put in front of us. Right? Because Ohio State still had to go out there and beat a Tennessee and a Oregon and a Texas. You know what I'm saying? To get to the national championship. So they had a hell of a path to walk through. And that looks very daunting on paper. So you hope that you're in that Ohio State position. But, a lot of it comes down to the luck of the draw and who they put on your schedule. Because like I said, once again, if Texas would have had SMU, Boise State, and Penn State, I have no doubt in my mind they'd be playing tonight in the national championship game, more than likely against Ohio State. Now, continuing to talk about Notre Dame, right? Because I'm looking at this Texas team and I'm like, what don't they have or what is missing? And so we look at Notre Dame, and I don't think that there's an overwhelming talent advantage over the Texas Longhorns. If anything, I think you would look at Texas and say they have more talent than Notre Dame. So what is it potentially that Notre Dame has that maybe Texas doesn't, right? And I think when you look at it, the first thing that stands out to me, and really the biggest thing maybe, and this is why fans were screaming for Arch Manning all year, is even though Riley Leonard doesn't wow you with his numbers or his playmaking, he did rush for, I believe, almost 1,000 yards this year, right? If not, definitely over like 600-700, which is a lot. And that means defenses have to account for that. And so I think that what Riley Leonard brings to the table that maybe we were missing at times is that situational playmaking, right? Not turning the ball over, even though I think he did have an interception against Penn State, but he wasn't turnover prone this year. That is something we dealt with Quinn Ewers at times. And his ability to keep the ball and make plays with his legs and give defenses something to account for, I think is the biggest difference between this Texas offense and this Notre Dame offense. Even though Texas is a more explosive offense than Notre Dame, I think Riley Leonard's ability to make plays with his legs is what has put them over the top and the reason that they've won 12 or 13 straight games since they inexplicably lost to Northern Illinois. Because when he can always take the ball and get you 6, 7, 8 yards with his legs, when you're worried about covering receivers downfield or matching up with their receivers and their tight ends or trying to stop their running backs, and all of a sudden you got Riley Leonard taking off for 8 to 10 yards, that's just damn near impossible to stop as a defense. It's damn near impossible to account for. And then if you start allocating resources to, we can't let Riley Leonard run the ball, you're just taking somebody away from all of those playmakers that Notre Dame has. So if I'm looking at the one thing that Notre Dame has that Texas doesn't, that maybe can get Texas over the top into the national championship game, it would probably be their quarterback's ability to run the ball with his legs and beat you either with his arm or his legs. Because when you look at the wide receiver core that they have, I think they have good receivers. I really like Jaden Greathouse out of Austin. I try to root for any Texas kid. But their receivers aren't better than Texas. They're certainly not more dynamic. They have good receivers, but I would think Texas has a better receiving core, right? You look at their tight end, they do have a really good one, but Gunnar Helm was one of the best tight ends in the country this year. Their offensive line, they were playing, I think, a true freshman on the offensive line. They were missing linemen. Like, our unit on the offensive line looked better than theirs did this year, and they have a really good running game. But Texas with Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue still had a really good running game. I think it could have had a higher ceiling with Cedric Baxter, but we had a really good running game this year. Now, in the biggest games, that's another big difference. We couldn't get the running game going. Against Georgia twice and against Ohio State, we couldn't get the running game going. Even against Arizona State, we couldn't get it going. It feels like Notre Dame can find a way to run the ball against everybody they play, but a lot of that comes down to you have to stop the quarterback from running the ball as well, which makes it damn near impossible to stop a team's running game. All right. And then you look at their defense, it's one of the best in the country. They blitz a lot. They play a lot of man coverage. But you look at this Texas defense all year, and then you look at this Texas defense against Ohio State, and I would say that they did their job. They gave up some big plays. That's what a defense is going to do, especially when you take chances. But nonetheless, I think Texas, if you compare Texas to Notre Dame, I think it's a favorable comparison. I think the two things really, right, that Notre Dame has that Texas doesn't, were a quarterback that's can beat you with his legs and the ability to run the ball consistently regardless of the opponent. We'll see how they do against Ohio State tonight. But I think those are the two biggest things that Notre Dame has that Texas doesn't, that could potentially put Texas in this position next year. Otherwise, I'm looking at Texas very favorably against Notre Dame. And I think if Texas would have found a way to beat Ohio State, they would be the favorites going into this game tonight against Notre Dame. But maybe with Arch Manning next year, you add what's the word I'm trying to say? You add another dimension to this offense that gives you the push you need to get over the hump and get past the semifinals. In the next segment, we talk about Ohio State, right? Because Ohio State is a different beast. What does Ohio State have that maybe Texas doesn't that can get them into the national championship next season? We discuss after the break. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Prizepicks, right? This message is brought to you by Prizepicks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prizepicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, Prizepicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get on the action than with Prizepicks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least two players. And if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yes, that's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you played your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prizepicks. Prizepicks, run your game. You know, it's so funny because of the 12-team playoff, because if this was still the 14 playoff, Ohio State wouldn't even be in it. Ryan Day would be on probably the hottest seat in the country, or one of them. But instead, they're in the national championship game, favorites, and now we're asking how Texas can be like Ohio State next season, right? You know, I think when you look at Ohio State, I would say that band for band, player for player, position for position, they do have more talent than the University of Texas, right? So maybe in terms of Texas being able to get here next year, you have to overwhelm teams with your talent. Because I do feel like Ohio State probably, and we saw it up close and personal, was the most talented team in college football this year. However, I don't feel as though when they played Texas, they won because of their talent. And that's kind of weird to say because the players are the ones on the field, but I didn't feel like there were games this year where the team that played Texas just could not match up. No matter what scheme you had, how well you coached, how well you executed, you just didn't have the guys to beat Texas's guys. I didn't feel like Texas didn't have the guys to beat Ohio State's guys, right? It just came down to a few plays, but we were 1 yard away from tying that game up, and anything could have happened if it was 21-21. Defense gets a stop. You know, we get into field goal range with a few plays. We win that game. We could very well be in this game tonight against Notre Dame. So although Ohio State does have the advantage this season of probably being the most talented team in college football, Texas certainly has had enough talent the last 2 years to get to the national championship game. So you look at it and you say, what does Ohio State have that Texas doesn't have, right? But I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, when your receiving core is missing Jonte Cook, right? It's missing Isaiah Bond, essentially, and Matthew Golden goes out, you still have good receivers, but I don't think you have a receiving core that could put you over the top. Because now you're asking DeAndre Moore and Ryan Wingo and Silas Bolden to go out there and match what Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Carnell Tate are doing. But you stopped Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith for the most part. Abuka was, getting his yards in the first quarter, but really after that, not too much, right? And then Jeremiah Smith had one catch for 3 yards. So even though you were lacking at the wide receiver position, it didn't necessarily feel like their wide receivers were just taking over the game. You look at the offensive line comparison, and I thought that their offensive line outplayed us. But going into the matchup, I thought it was Texas probably had the advantage. I didn't think that their offensive line was dominant, especially when Texas started to really, get in their bag defensively. But you look at what we had, and I mean, Cam Williams had a really bad game. And, that defense was able to get some pressure. And a lot of it was, Quinn Ewers being a standing duck in the pocket, not being able to evade that pressure, not being able to step up, not being able to move around, right? So the offensive lines, I think that they won the matchup in this game. But I think Texas had the type of offensive line, and a lot of it has to do with Cam Williams not being healthy. But Texas had the type of offensive line that should be a strength for them in almost any matchup. You look at the running backs, obviously when you lose Cedric Baxter, it's hard to say that what you have is comparable to Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. But I didn't feel like Ohio State overwhelmed us with their running game. Obviously Travion Henderson had the big 75-yard screen pass that could have been a backbreaker. Texas tied the game after that, so it wasn't the 75-yard screen touchdown. But I didn't feel like it was just like, oh, they got too much at the running back position because they're just gashing us with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, even though Judkins had the 2 rushing touchdowns and Travion Henderson had the big 75-yard screen. It didn't feel like they won the game because of their running backs. Now, we certainly didn't put ourselves in a position to win the game because of our running backs, Jaden Blue in the passing game, but we know that so much of our offense is built on being able to run the ball with the power run inside and outside, right? And being able to control the ball and then play action and RPO outside of that. Nonetheless, like, I'm not trying to get too technical. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't feel like, oh, their running backs were a big difference, right? And then when you look at Will Howard, I thought he started off hot, but I thought he simmered down. He threw a big interception. He was under a lot of pressure. He wasn't necessarily just extending drives. And, for the most part, when you look at Quinn Ewers and Will Howard, you could say Will Howard maybe outplayed Quinn Ewers a little bit, but I don't know if that was the edge in the game, right? Obviously, Quinn Ewers turned the ball over twice in the last 3 minutes, one of those leading to a scoop and score touchdown. But I felt like that was more on Cam Williams whiffing on that block than Quinn Ewers just being unaware. But, people will have a different story about that for the rest of their lives, right? We'll all have different perspectives on that. What Will Howard does bring to the table that Riley Leonard also does, even though they don't run him as much, and Quinn Ewers necessarily doesn't have, is his ability to hurt you with his legs. And that didn't show up a lot in that game, but it showed up when it mattered the most. When they needed a 4th down conversion, Will Howard was able to take off and damn near score a touchdown, right? And that drive was able, after he extended it with his legs, they were able to go up 21-14 and then ultimately make it 28-14, and that's your final score. So that, in essence, was the game-winning drive and the game-winning touchdown. But like I said, they didn't use him a ton with his legs in that game, but that's a theme that we keep coming back to, right? Your quarterback having the ability to do that changes the math on the defense. Your quarterback having the ability to take off and run is what could put you over the top. Like, if we look at the teams left in the National Football League right now, there's 4 teams left that have a chance to win a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes can take off and run. Josh Allen can take off and run. Jaden Daniels can take off and run. Jalen Hurts can take off and run. Like, in this era of football, that is a big thing that can put you over the edge, and why many people think that Arch Manning would have helped this team a lot this year, and next year will bring another dimension to this offense. When you look at the defense, they have superstars all over. They had a really, really strong defensive line, but I think if you looked at it, both defensive lines kind of won the matchup against the offensive line in this game. I thought Ohio State's defensive line definitely got to Texas's offensive line and Quinn Ewers, but I thought that Texas defensive line definitely got to Ohio State's offensive line and Will Howard. You look at the linebacker position, they have talent. We have talent, with Anthony Hill. And then you look at the DBs, I mean, Michael Taft, Andrew Makuba, Jade Barron. I thought they played a hell of a game, right? I mean, there were some, moments where we gave up some plays to our receivers, to their receivers, in zone coverage. But, I think there were also some plays where, they gave up mostly to the running back and Jaden Blue, you know what I mean? But to me, I didn't feel like Ohio State's talent was just overwhelming. I didn't feel like, they got Caleb Downs at safety. Like, they just got too much. I felt like we were able to match them talent for talent, position for position, even though they have a little bit more. I don't think that's the reason that Ohio State won the game. And you look at this Texas team sometimes, and it may seem like they're undisciplined, like they commit a lot of penalties, but Ohio State committed a shit ton of penalties in that game too. So really, I just think that with Texas getting to this point next year and being able to win it, a lot of it comes down to situational playmaking, right? It always seems like when we're in those do or die moments in these type of games, the advantage goes to the other team. Obviously penalties that could help you a lot, even if the other team commits penalties. If you don't, that's an advantage there. But it's, and then obviously having, the ability to run the ball with your quarterback, especially in this era of football, would give you a big boost, next year. The luck of the draw in terms of the schedule. If you don't have to run into a team like Ohio State, that's big in terms of getting to the national championship. But I still feel like there's just something missing. And some teams just have it. And Texas has had a ton of talent the last 2 years, but I sit here after I've talked for 20 minutes and I'm wondering, is Texas one of those teams that's going to be good but not good enough? Is Texas missing that it takes to get over the hump? And I guess we have to go through a whole nother season to find out next year. And maybe with Arch Manning and maybe with all the talent you have coming in next season, you'll be good enough to get over that hump, right? Maybe the competition that you face this year won't be the competition you face next year. But if I'm asking myself, what is it going to take for Texas to get into the national championship game next season? I can identify small things, but I'm not 100% sure what it is that the last 2 years has kept Texas from being in this position. Obviously, we can identify Michael Penix played the game of his life. It was the pass defense last year. We can identify that the offensive line and the running game needed to be better this year. But what is it that has kept Texas out of the national championship game the last couple of years? To me, feels a little bit bigger than that. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we discuss who is playing in the national championship tonight, Ohio State and Notre Dame. My thoughts on the matchup that Texas should be playing in. Jeez. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going, right? The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. When I look at this matchup tonight, Ohio State, Notre Dame, I think that Notre Dame is a really good football team. Like you probably already know where I'm going to go with this when I say it like that. I think Notre Dame is a really good football team, right? I think that they can do some interesting things on offense with their ability to run the ball and with their quarterback, right? And I think that in the biggest moments, he's been a playmaker. I think that Marcus Freeman is a hell of a coach. All right, and what he's been able to do with that program, since taking over for Brian Kelly is nothing short of amazing, right? Because Notre Dame is that team that's been living off, even though they've made a national championship and got smoked in it, right? They've been living off aura and, their their pre-2000 resume for a long time, right? And now they're back in the national championship game. They're validating why Notre Dame, is the type of program that they are. And that defense is amazing, right? They blitz a lot. They play a lot of man coverage. I'm not sure if that's the best thing to do against 3 National Football League wide receivers, but I mean, if you can get pressure on the quarterback, that's the great equalizer. And, That Ohio State offensive line, they are missing 2 starters. So if you can get pressure on Will Howard, it doesn't matter what. You could have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb down there. It still wouldn't matter, right? If the quarterback can't get the ball to him. So, maybe Notre Dame, comes out with a hell of a game plan and they shock the world tonight. But I'm not sure that's going to happen. All right. I just think that Ohio State, it's the perfect storm, right? I mean, they're playing too well. They have way too much talent, a lot more talent than Notre Dame does. I think that defense is playing hellacious. They've beaten Tennessee, Oregon, and Texas to get here. And I just think they're going to be a little bit too much for Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame can muck it up a little bit. I think Notre Dame can keep it low scoring, right? I don't see Ohio State going into this game and just scoring 40 or anything like that. Like I do think that Notre Dame can make it interesting. But at the end of the day, I think Ohio State just has it too much. I think Ohio State's going to win this game 24-13, and they're going to be national champions. And 3 weeks ago, Ohio State fans wanted Ryan Day fired. And now he's about to hoist a national championship trophy, in my opinion, for the Ohio State, which is just crazy. But that's the magic that the 12-team playoff brings. And hopefully next year, Arch Manning and Steve Sarkisian are able to navigate their way through it and hoist this trophy. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hug 'em. Peace.